In 1995, when I was 10 years old, I read a book by Stephen King called The Gunslinger, which was the first book in the Dark Tower series. Instead of a gory read, perhaps about a killer St. Bernard or a murderous clown, the book was a slow-paced thriller featuring multi-dimensional characters like Roland, Deschain, and Jake Chambers. The Dark Tower became my favorite book series, and I used to have all the books on display in my bedroom. Nearly a decade later, in 2004, I ran to the bookstore early one morning to buy the just-released 7th series book, subtitled The Dark Tower. I read the entire thing in one day. That was nearly 20 years ago. The ending was controversial and got a lot of tongues wagging. If you don't know what it is, this video is not for you. The big question asked at the time and ever since, what did it mean? Some people, a lot of people even hated the ending, thought it was a cop-out or something. I didn't, I thought it was awesome. Dark Tower mania was high as a kite in the 90s and early 2000s, but it seems to have died down until seeing a resurgence recently. Just in the past couple of years, I've seen 2 or 3 other wonderful people on YouTube give their own takes on what the ending could have meant, and though I think they're all fantastic interpretations and I salute these individuals wholeheartedly, I think there's a missing piece. Thus far, I've not heard anyone else say this in fact, so allow me to be the first. Therefore, I now present to you the ending of the Dark Tower, fully explained by the world's leading authority on Dark Tower and Stephen King related literature, me. Enjoy. If you haven't read The Dark Tower, don't watch the rest of this video. Also, if you have read it, then you know dozens of other King books somehow tie into The Dark Tower. At a minimum, major spoilers, especially for the following books. Additionally, I'd like to make clear that when reaching my conclusions, I only take into account the 7 primary series books. While I loved book 4.5, the short story The Little Sisters of Illyria, and the semi-canon graphic novel series, the truth is that one can read the 7 books and come away with a complete understanding. The other stuff is, by my reckoning, purely bonus material. The Dark Tower begins with the now iconic words, "The man in black fled across the desert, and the gunslinger followed." We meet our protagonist, Roland of the line of Eld, in the post-apocalyptic Midworld, a knight of an ancient order holding sacred revolvers, a gunslinger who pursues his nemesis, the nameless man in black, across a gargantuan desert. In his quest, he meets a boy named Jake, who died in New York only to be reborn in Midworld with little memory of his previous life, and Roland comes to love Jake as a son. Throughout the pursuit of the first book, we come to realize that the man in black is only a means to an end, as what Roland truly seeks is the Dark Tower. What the Dark Tower is and why Roland seeks it, we don't know. But near the climax of the book, Roland betrays the boy Jake, letting him fall into a dark abyss in the hopes of catching the man in black. In book 2, Roland is joined by his new friends Eddie and Susanna, and in book 3, Roland is able to save Jake using a special door that joins his and Jake's worlds together. They're also joined by a dog. Sort of. In books 5, 6, and 7, Roland and his trusty band of gunslingers travel through various worlds and save not the universe, the multiverse from destruction and chaos wrought forth by the Crimson King. The cost is great, however, as Eddie is killed battling the Breakers. Jake dies saving the author of their story, Stephen King. Susanna, knowing only death awaited her, leaves through a mysterious door to parts unknown, and even their pet animal Oi sacrifices himself battling a monstrous man-spider. At the end of the final book, Roland engages in a biblical fight against the Crimson King, defeating him and reaching his destination at the Dark Tower. I'd now like to talk to you about Family Guy. What? Yes, that Family Guy. In the middle of this video about the Dark Tower, Family Guy. If you've ever watched a series, you know that the character Stewie has a machine which he and the dog Brian use for temporal and multiversal travel throughout various episodes. In Season 9, Episode 16, Brian and Stewie fight over the machine, causing it to malfunction and transport them outside the universe. A place with no laws of physics, beyond time and space, no present, no future, no past, non-existence. To return home, Stewie overloads the return pad's reactor, releasing enough energy to send them back into the universe. Once home, Stewie observes that the energy spectrum of his return pad precisely matches the cosmic microwave background radiation, or CMBR, of the universe. We, the audience, know that in real life, the CMBR was discovered in 1965 by astronomers Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson, for which they won the Nobel Prize in Physics. The CMBR is one of the most monumental discoveries of cosmology, as it provides resounding evidence for the Big Bang and that the universe is around 13.8 billion years old. Because the energy spectrums of the two radiations match, Stewie concludes that he, in fact, created the universe, whilst launching them from non-existence into the universe. When Brian objects, saying that the Big Bang occurred billions of years prior, Stewie reminds him they were outside time and space in non-existence. When a befuddled Brian asks how Stewie could have made the universe if he himself was born in it, Stewie goes on to explain. It's called a temporal causality loop. The universe created me, so I could create it, so it could create me, and so on. Though Family Guy is a humorous show, causality loops appear many times throughout film and literature. The 2014 masterpiece Interstellar, directed by Christopher Nolan, features multiple of these temporal causality loops, as does Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Many television shows have made use of it, such as Game of Thrones and The Twilight Zone. In the horror drama comedy series Supernatural, brothers Sam and Dean Winchester inherit a 1967 Chevy Impala from their father John Winchester. But we later found out that their father never meant to buy the Impala at all. He was going to buy a 1964 Volkswagen Transporter, as he intended to start a family with Sam and Dean's mother Mary. Dean travels back in time, sees his father about to purchase the world's ugliest van, and convinces him to buy the Impala instead. And as it turns out, after 7 books of waiting, Stephen King served up a causality loop as the ending to The Dark Tower. The theme of Book 1 is our introduction to Roland and the Tower. The theme of Books 2 through 4 is the formation of his band, or quartet, made up of Eddie, Jake, Susanna, and Oi. And in Books 5 through 7, Roland and the group face an existential threat to the multiverse itself. They defeat the wolves, the lowmen, the breakers, and they save the life of the author of their story, thereby saving existence. At the end of Book 7, after defeating the Crimson King, the Dark Tower takes Roland and inserts him at the beginning of Book 1. The series ends with the exact same words that it began with. The man in black fled across the desert, and the gunslinger followed. Roland starts all over, right back where he started. As it turns out, this has happened before, a great many times before. The Dark Tower creates Roland, so that Roland can save the Dark Tower, so that the Dark Tower can create Roland, and so on. But why? Although we couldn't possibly have known it, Stephen King actually gave us the ending to The Dark Tower years before Book 7 came out. Allow me to present Exhibit A. In 1998, a short story by Stephen King called That Feeling You Can Only Say What It Is in French was published in the New Yorker magazine and was later included in the compilation book Everything's Eventual in 2002. The title is an obvious reference to Déjà Vu. The story begins with a woman named Carol who wakes up into a dream. In Carol's case, she's woken up by screams warning someone named Floyd, a name she doesn't recognize, that something bad is about to happen. We, the audience, then learn that Carol is on a car ride with her husband Bill, celebrating her second honeymoon, or 25-year anniversary, of a marriage that she's not very happy in. As the story progresses, Carol is struck with an overbearing sense of déjà vu, or that feeling you can only say what it is in French. Her dream then turns into a nightmare as the world around her melts away in fire before she wakes up into another dream where she is on a plane ride. This repeats several times. Throughout the various dream cycles, we learn from Carol's memories about her life. She was raised Catholic. She disobeyed her family to marry a man she believed would save her from her strict upbringing. Though her husband Bill is a successful man who can afford to charter private jets, her marriage is unhappy. Her husband has been unfaithful with at least one secretary. Throughout the story, somber images of a disapproving Virgin Mary appear on her car ride, as do memories of her Catholic childhood. There's a lot of unspoken detestation and contempt between Carol and her husband Bill. And though it's never fully spelled out loud, she was once pregnant and aborted the child without ever telling anyone, likely because her husband didn't want children. Near the end of the story, Carol almost realizes the truth. Whatever her true death was happened long ago when two pilots, one named Floyd, lost control of the plane they were riding in. Carol is now reliving her final moments in a sad marriage, contemplating the horrible sins that she committed, the price she paid to escape her rigid Catholic childhood, again and again and again. As to what exactly this has to do with Roland Deschain, well, upon a first reading, it seems Carol is in purgatory as she frequently recalls a wicked jump rope rhyme from her childhood. Mary, Mary, what's the story? Save my ass from purgatory. However, in the afterword, Stephen King ponders that Carol is in an existential version of hell where everything repeats forever. I think this story is about hell, a version of it where you are condemned to do the same thing over and over again. Existentialism. There's an idea that hell is other people. My idea is that it might be repetition. So according to the man himself, hell is not a place you go to, but endless repetition. At the ending of Book 7 of The Dark Tower, we learn that Roland Deschain is and has been trapped in a temporal causality loop for eons, reliving his quest hundreds, thousands, maybe even billions of times, following a man in black across a desert as a means to an end to find a dark tower. But it's more than that. It's more than just a temporal causality loop. Ladies and gentlemen, I now present to you the Dark Tower theory. Roland is in hell. In an ancient battle between the forces of good and evil, Roland, his best friend Cuthbert, and the last few gunslingers fight against the evil forces of the good man John Farson at the final battle of Jericho Hill. In preparation for their last charge, Cuthbert takes the Horn of Eld, that is of King Arthur Eld, the first gunslinger in Midworld, and blows into it before being shot down, arrow in his eyes by a fighter named Rudin Filaro, actually a persona of the supervillain Randall Flagg, Walter O'Dim, Martin, the Walking Dude, and many other aliases, none more terrifying than the Man in Black. Roland should have picked up Eld's horn, as his destiny was to present it along with his guns at the foot of the tower, but in his grief and bloodlust, he forgets all about it. After Roland enters the Dark Tower, and it transports him back to the beginning of his pursuit of the Man in Black in the desert, the reader learns that in this temporal loop, Roland did pick up Eld's horn, and a voice advises Roland to stand and be true. This seems to imply that there exists some possibility that Roland's quest will indeed someday conclude. Perhaps this very next time, that he will reach the Dark Tower and be rewarded for his service with sweet peace, an end to the cycle, that he will find redemption, that his long journey will come to an end, maybe in this very next iteration of the cycle. To which I say, bullshit. Going back to that Jericho Hill memory that Roland had, he seems to have two streams of consciousness at the same time. In the first one, he knows he is dreaming. In the second one, he is the Roland during the battle who thinks he is going to die. What does he think when he realizes he's going to go Todash and be taken somewhere else? Not now. Ah gods, not now. Let me finish it. Let me finish it with my friend at my side and have peace at last. Please. Could it really be the case that Stephen King wrote the Dark Tower series so that we, the audience, can believe that it's the second to the last time that Roland completes his quest? No, that doesn't make sense. It's just 1 in a million trillion loops, in infinite loops. It won't come to an end. It won't come to an end ever. Allow me to present Exhibit B. In June 2013, Stephen King published for the magazine Tin House a short story called Afterlife, later to be included in the book compilation The Bazaar of Bad Dreams in 2015. The protagonist is a Wall Street executive named William Andrews who dies only to wake up in a mysterious office building. The walls of the hallways have strange pictures of his friends from different times in his life, having barbecues with celebrity figures from different years like Ronald Reagan. After wandering the dim halls of this abandoned building for a bit, Andrews finds an office where he meets the building's only resident, a man named Isaac Harris, who informs Andrews that he is his spiritual caseworker. Harris informs Andrews that he died and that he is there to make a choice between 2 doors. The door to the left, where he will relive his life exactly as it already happened with absolutely no discernible changes, or he can go through the door on the right, upon which he will simply cease to exist. Here we learn a bit more about Andrews and his desire to live again, as he wishes to correct some of the mistakes that he made in his life. Andrews was an investment banker for Goldman Sachs in the years leading up to the 2009 recession, and although he saw firsthand the corruption that led to millions of people losing their life savings and homes, he did absolutely nothing. Harris describes Andrews as securities fraud, profits in the billions, taxes in the low millions. How many clients' trust did you abuse? How many people lost their life savings thanks to your greed and short-sightedness? We also learn of other regrets Andrews had in life, like a theft scandal he had as a teen that his father got him out of. Most morbidly, as a college student, he and 2 other boys gang raped a girl while she was passed out. Harris, however, points out that he won't change a single thing. He tells Andrews that he has already passed through his office numerous times, reliving his life from beginning to end, and it's occurred exactly the same way each time. The theft of the watch, his brother's broken finger, and the abused girl. In the end, Andrews chooses to live again. When he is reborn, his mother marvels at the limitless possibilities that his life has to offer. We, the audience, know there are not limited possibilities. In fact, there are no possibilities. When thinking of the 2009 financial crisis and all the people who lost their homes, Andrews thinks, all that chicanery went on far above my pay grade. Well, most of it. He's going to make the exact same mistakes again. Sound familiar? When I first read this story, I immediately recognized the parallels to the ending of The Dark Tower. I assumed that the character of Andrews was an allegory for Roland of Gilead. On some level, it sort of is, but even that's only half the story. We also learn more about Isaac Harris. Isaac Harris spends his entire time in his dirty office with stacks and stacks of folders, notebooks, and papers as he manages hundreds of clients. Hundreds of people who die and choose to relive their life hoping to change something or other. Sometimes they go through the door on the right and end their existence, but more often than not, they relive their lives over and over again. In between the visits from the clients, Harris simply waits and waits and waits. The reason Isaac Harris is burdened with this unenviable job. When Harris was alive in the early 20th century, he was the owner of a shirtwaist factory. He locked over 100 women workers in the factory building as a business practice to prevent the women from stealing and from smoking, but the building caught fire and the women burned to death. Harris eventually dies, and this is his afterlife. Like Andrews, Harris refuses to take responsibility for his actions. He blames the women themselves for starting the fire and occasionally stealing, thereby forcing him to lock them all in the factory. They were stealing us blind. I wasn't the one smoking. I wasn't the one who dropped the match. When Harris died, he awoke in the office building, tasked with being a spiritual caseworker for hundreds of people who were not quite as bad as he was in life. Harris hopes to one day end his time in what he calls purgatory, but for every one person who ends their existence, 1 or 2 new cases arrive via pneumatic tube. He never sleeps, never eats, and never uses the toilet. He never interacts with anyone else or does anything else. Harris will never finish his time. He will see the same faces before him over and over again. Endless repetition. He died and went to hell. Is this sounding familiar? Here I have to pause to tell you something about this character, Isaac Harris. He's not fictional. Stephen King is the best at inventing fictional characters, but this isn't one of them. Isaac Harris was a real person who really did own a shirtwaist factory, and along with his partner Max Blanc, locked hundreds of women into their factory building. They died in real life. Guys, I don't mean to belabor the point, but stop and think about that for a moment. In real life, Isaac Harris and his partner Max locked hundreds of predominantly teenage women inside a room with no way out while they escaped through the fire escape. The building caught fire and the poor women perished. 62 of the women jumped to their deaths to escape the flames. The ones who didn't burned to death. Want to know what's even more insidious? He was acquitted of all charges. Harris and Blanc hired a slimy, unethical lawyer to convince the jury that the surviving women were liars and destroyed them on the stand. In fact, they collected a hefty insurance payment, so they kind of made money from the whole thing. It's not Andrews the investment banker who is an allegory for Roland of Deschain. Not really. It's the piece of shit character Isaac Harris based on the real-life piece of shit Isaac Harris, the business owner responsible for the deaths of hundreds of innocent women and girls. Ask yourself, if hell is a real place, do you think this man deserves to escape from it? So as to Roland's destiny, there is no escape for him out of the cycle. What significance is there that Roland has the Horn of Eld at the ending of the story? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Lip service by Stephen King. Not only does Roland go to hell, he stays there forever. Roland wants the tower very, very bad. He's obsessed with it. Eddie Dean calls him a tower junkie. Let's first examine what Roland is willing to do for his precious tower. The absolute most clear indication of just how much he cares about the Dark Tower and the lengths he'll go to find it, he lets Jake die. I know we all know how bad this is, but really, stop and think about it. A grown man lets a child fall to his death. A boy who loves him. A boy that he himself loved. He steps over him across the chasm. But why does Roland want to go to the Dark Tower exactly? Well, this is something that I think doesn't get enough attention. Throughout the various backstories in books 1 and 4, we learn that as a teenager, Roland passes his manhood test, defeating the trainer of all gunslingers Court much earlier than expected at 14 years old for the sole purpose of killing Martin, aka Walter. Roland's father Stephen recognizes that Roland is no match for the sorcerer Martin and instead sends him to Megis. There, Roland and his friends discover that the oligarchs of the province have already thrown in their hat with John Farson, the good man, his father's enemy. They are thus thrown into a deadly game of politics of the type Stephen had been trying to avoid. Roland, Cuthbert, and Elaine defeat Farson's forces, kill the big coffin hunters, and stumble upon one of the universe's most terrifying objects, the grapefruit, one of the original 13 magical crystal balls, the pink one. Though its true origins are a mystery, the most accepted backstory is that these crystal balls were created by the wizard Merlin, 12 for each of the beams holding up the tower, and 1 for the tower itself. After killing the big coffin hunter Jonas, Roland picks up the grapefruit and it sends him various visions of the past, the future, and that the Dark Tower is dying. If it dies, apocalypse follows, so the end of existence is at stake. Roland tells Cuthbert and Elaine, the tower is crumbling, and if it falls, everything we know will be swept away. There will be chaos beyond our imagining. We must go, and we will go. I choose the tower. This, in book 4 of 7, is the first time in the series that we're given an explanation why Roland wants to go to the Dark Tower. Except, is it? Read very closely, and you will see we actually don't get the full picture. We assume that Roland wants to go to the Dark Tower to save it. He's a gunslinger. He represents the white, the line of Arthur Eld. He is bound by honor and tradition to do the right thing. Therefore, he must be seeking the Dark Tower because he wants to save the world like Superman, right? If this was true, then all the bad things we assumed about Roland Deschain are justified by his desire to save the universe. But he's not, and Roland knows this. At the beginning of book 2, while sitting on the beach, Roland has a dream where he is drowning. However, this turns out to be a good dream because in the dream, he is not Roland, but Jake. Roland reflects that this is a relief because it would be better to drown as Jake than to live as himself, a man who had, for a cold dream, betrayed a child that trusted him. It doesn't get a lot clearer than that. It's not that Roland is not the most moral person, it's that he's the opposite. Roland doesn't care about good or evil, just the tower. In book 4, after Roland looks into the wizard's glass, he makes clear he doesn't care about saving Mages or the affiliation. No more is John Farson our Ka. We're not going toward his men to defeat him, but only because they're in our way. It's in his way to the tower. Even in his heart of hearts, Roland knows he would hurt, betray, kill, and sacrifice anything and anyone for the tower. In book 3, when Roland saves Jake from the doorkeeper monster, seconds after Jake arrives in Midworld, the first thing Jake does is ask Roland, "You won't let me drop this time?" To which Roland replies, "No, not this time, not ever again." But in the deepest darkness of his heart, he thought of the tower and wondered. Roland's band of friends know this all too well. It's an open secret and is confirmed in book 6. Susanna is abducted by the demon woman Mia. Eddie and Roland are separated from Jake and Callahan. After surviving an ambush, Eddie realizes that the in-book version of Stephen King is the author of The Dark Tower and that he knows where he lives. Roland boldly exclaims, "Then drive on for your father's sake. If he's God, our God, I'd look him in the eye and ask him the way to the tower." When Eddie tries to correct him and asks, "Would you not ask him the way to Susanna first?" Eddie, quote, regretted it and prayed the gunslinger would not answer it. Roland doesn't and twirls his fingers for Eddie to go, because they both know what the answer is. Now, I can already hear the objections. But isn't Roland's whole arc that he transforms from a heartless child killer in book 1 to a loving father in book 7? That he discovered something more important to him than the entire universe, which is his love for Jake, his adopted son? Let's examine this critically. The strongest case for Roland finding a moral compass and realizing there's things more important than his selfish quest come when Jake dies in book 7. After Brian Smith's minivan runs Jake over while attempting to save Stephen King, Roland thinks, "To hell with Gans Navel. To hell with the stories that come out of it. To hell with the tower. Let it be you and not my boy. For the briefest of brief moments, Roland does realize what's more important to him. Jake, not the tower. But as always, it comes too late. And as I will further argue, he didn't mean it. It was purely situational at the horror of seeing his beloved Jake die. What follows is what I believe to be the strongest evidence that Roland doesn't change, doesn't learn, doesn't stop being the monster that he is. Let's examine how Roland responds to a question from Father Callahan in Book 5. At this time, they know that Susanna is hiding another personality named Mia, and that she may be pregnant basically with the Antichrist version of Dark Tower Land. Callahan asks him, "What is it you fear most?" "The breaking of the Tet," Roland said at once. This is not an accident. Our author's not even being subtle with us. Callahan recognizes the stunning inhumanity of Roland. The breaking of the Tet, Callahan mused, not the death of your friend, but the breaking of the Tet. I wonder if your friends know what sort of man you are, Roland. They know, Roland said, and on that subject said no more. Later, when Roland is trying to claim some moral high ground about abortion, Callahan calls him out on his BS. You who spoke of the breaking of your Tet before you spoke of the taking of her life. Shame on you. Shame. To which we hear Roland offer the excuse of his life. My quest, the quest of my Catet, is the Dark Tower Pier. It's not saving this world we're about or even this universe, but all universes, all of existence. This is Roland attempting to argue that any shitty thing that he does is justifiable. Because the tower. It's an excuse. After Jake dies in Book 7, Roland goes to New York and meets a group of kind-hearted people who have been working their entire lives to help Roland and his friends without them even knowing. Moses Carver, his daughter Marianne Carver, and Nancy Deepno. In conversation, Nancy says, "Your quest to defeat the forces of the Crimson King has been successful." But Moses interrupts, "That was never this man's quest, and you know it." When the women object to Pop Moses, Roland bades them, "Nay, let him speak, for he says true. If we're going to have it out, let us have it all out. For me, the beams have always been no more than means to an end. Had they broken, the tower would have fallen. Had the tower fallen, I should have never gained it and climbed to the top of it." There it is, the truth from the man himself. He's admitting it. He never gave a shit about the breakers or the beams. He wants the tower. Nancy Deepno is understandably horrified and asks him, "You're saying you cared more for the Dark Tower than for the continued existence of the universe? For the continued existence of all the universes?" The Dark Tower is existence, and I have sacrificed many friends to reach it over the years, including a boy who called me father. I have sacrificed my own soul in the bargain, Lady Sai, so turn thy impudent glass another way. May you do it soon, and do it well, I beg. Here again is the excuse of his life. He had to betray everyone he loves for existence. He's lying. He was telling the truth the first time. If you're still not convinced by Roland's words, then I present to you something that speaks louder. His actions. After the deaths of Eddie and Jake, Roland, Susanna, and Oi continue their travels towards the Dark Tower. On their way, they come to the castle of the Crimson King, where they meet not one, not two, but 3 Stephen King-looking creatures. The leader of their group, Themalo, informs them of 2 important things. Number 1, the beams have been saved. By freeing the breakers, especially Ted Brodigan, the beams that hold up the Dark Tower will heal themselves and regenerate the beams already broken. When the Red King saw that the Al Ghul would fall to you, he understood that the working beams would regenerate. More, that eventually those 2 working beams would recreate the other beams, knitting them forth mile by mile and wheel by wheel. If that happens, then eventually what has moved on might return again. Perhaps Midworld and Inworld, perhaps even Gilead, the light, the white. No perhaps about it, for Ka is a wheel, and if a wheel be not broken, it will always roll. Unless the Crimson King can become either Lord of the Tower or its Lord High Executioner, all that was will eventually return. This is important here. It means Roland did it. He saved the beams. He saved the Dark Tower and the multiverse. Number 2. Roland previously learned from Moses, Marion, and Nancy that the Crimson King is trapped on a balcony outside the Dark Tower forever. Vimalo confirms that he's powerless there. Undead or not, he never could have gained the top without some sigil of the Eld. But if you go on, you bring him the sigil of the Eld he needs to gain possession of that which now holds him captive. You cannot kill him with them, but it is possible that he might be able to take them from you. He'd choose to bring the tower down. If you turn back now, the dead king will be trapped forever where he is. And just in case anyone thinks Vimalo is lying, let's hear from Roland. Susanna asks, how much of it do you believe? Roland, pretty much all of it. Susanna, do you think that if he did get control of your guns, that he could get inside the tower and climb to the top? Roland, yes. The reply was immediate. So here's the sitch. The gunslingers won, the Crimson King lost, the cost was incredibly high. Deaths of Eddie, Jake, Callahan, but the universe has been saved. The Crimson King is trapped outside the Dark Tower for all eternity. The only thing Roland needs to do to ensure total and final victory is not take him his guns, because they're the one thing the Crimson King can use to get inside the Dark Tower, thereby destroying all their hard work and destroying existence. And what does Roland do? He continues his quest. He goes to the Dark Tower. He hasn't learned a goddamn thing. About that character arc, did Roland really change? No, he didn't. Maybe he softened a bit around the edges, but Roland remains the same heartless backstabber as the man who let a child die in book 1. Only by book 7, instead of a child, it's everyone who ever lived or who ever will live. Hypothetically speaking, if there was an escape, the solution would be not to seek the tower. Roland would free the Breakers, save Stephen King, and then live out his life with what remains of his cadet. But he doesn't. He stays in hell forever. In the final pages of the book, this is echoed various times. As she leaves, Susanna reflects that when she inhaled, she took in the breath of 1,000 years and 10,000 miles. And yes, she tasted death. But not for you, gunslinger. For others, but never for you. Never for you? The tower itself repeats this line. How many times had he traveled a loop like the one in the clip that had once pinched off his navel? How many times would he travel it? Death. But not for you, gunslinger. Never for you. You Darkle. You Tinct. May I be brutally frank? You go on, and each time you forget the last time, for you, each time is the first time. These words aren't there by accident. And consider Roland's memories of what others thought of him as he's being pulled through the door by the Dark Tower. You're the one who never changes, Court had told him once. And in his voice, Roland could have sworn he heard fear. Although why Court should have been afraid of him, a boy, Roland couldn't tell. It'll be your damnation, boy. You'll wear out 100 pairs of boots on your walk to hell. Vanny tells him, those who do not learn from the past are condemned to repeat it. Are condemned to repeat it. And his own mother says, Roland, must you always be so serious? Can you never rest? As I said before, I don't think that our author included all of these lines just for kicks. If there was a best defense for Roland's actions, it's that maybe the Dark Tower made him the way he is, meaning Roland can't be held accountable for his own actions. like the God of the Old Testament hardening Pharaoh's heart in the book of Exodus. Our author does reference the Bible a lot throughout his books. This brings a free will versus determinism debate that would require its own video. But to be honest, I don't have the answer, and I won't pretend to. This I can say with certainty. Roland is often described as a man with no imagination. He straightened portraits in motels. He doesn't think, he just does. He shoots first and asks questions later. He has slow wits and fast hands. The final words the tower says are, "Different, this time mayhap different. If you stand, if you are true." Roland doesn't stand and be true. Just like William Andrews and Isaac Harris, who never change. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but just a quick note on Walter O'Dim, also known as the Man in Black. Strangely enough, Roland's cadet should have been Roland, the Man in Black, and Jack Mort, the man who cost Susanna her legs and who killed Jake Chambers the first time in New York City. Roland explains this the very first time he explains the idea of cadet to Eddie and Susanna. Roland nodded his understanding. In this case, cadet bound Jake, Walter, Jack Mort, and me. So let's spare a small moment for Walter, the ultimate villain not only of the Dark Tower, but of the entire Stephen King universe, the Man in Black that the gunslinger followed across the desert. In some ways, Roland and Walter are the same person, like Neo and Agent Smith, mirror opposites of each other who each want the same goal. Because of this, they also share a certain psychic link between them. When Roland learns that Mordred killed Walter, he remarks, "Walter's finally left my dreams." In Book 7, before Walter's death, we get a small glimpse into his mind and to what he truly wants. Walter O'Dim had wandered long and under 100 names, but the tower had always been his goal. Does that sound like someone we know? Give up, it's Roland. Like Roland, he wanted to climb it and see what lived at the top, if anything did. Was it too late to become the god of all? Though Walter is a person who lies and misleads through many books, I think he is thinking the truth here. He wants to climb the tower, like Roland. He wanted to climb it and see what lived at the top. Not for altruism, but because he wanted to. That's it, nothing more. And then there's this important little nugget. Still, until he'd had Roland to complete him, to make him greater than his own destiny perhaps, Walter O'Dim had been little more than a wanderer left over from the old days. A mercenary with the vague ambition to penetrate the tower before it was brought down. The reason Walter's thoughts are important here is that Walter understands Roland. Roland wants the tower for the same reason that Edmund Hillary became the first person to reach Mount Everest with Sherpa Tenzing Norgay. The same reason British explorer Robert Falcon Scott and Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen competed to be the first man to reach the South Pole. The reason we sent humans to the moon and the reason some aspire to go to Mars. Both of these men exist to complete the loop. The Man in Black is there so that the gunslinger can follow him across the desert as he flees. And they both want the exact same thing. Humans have built the Hubble and James Webb telescopes to look into deep space. What do you think some of these scientists and astronomers would give to travel across the vastness of space to the Andromeda Galaxy? I think that some people would give anything. Their soul if they had one. Why do people want to climb Mount Everest and go to the moon and travel to the farthest galaxy? Eddie explains this in Book 4. Because it's there. So there you have it. Roland wants the tower for the simple reason that he wants the tower. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but what is the tower? Well, a lot of things, but primarily this. The center of all existence. The nexus at the center of the multiverse. And also, Gan himself. If the Dark Tower falls, then everything stops to exist and a discordia. If this were a different video, I'd have a lot more to say about Gan, which is Stephen King's play on the word God, such as I believe that Gan, the god of the Stephen King universe, is secretly the god of Catholicism. Crazy, huh? For some people though, the question of Gan becomes, if he's so powerful, why doesn't he just fix everything himself? This question is pointless and leads nowhere. Why doesn't Gan defeat the Breakers himself? Why doesn't Gan kill the wolves and restore Gilead to its former glory? And why doesn't Gan give Susanna her legs back and give Jake loving parents and create a wonderful paradise where there's a lake of stew and whiskey too, and then gives everyone a hot cup of coffee? Why doesn't Gan fix everything? Questions like this are worthless. I'm going to cite a favorite show of mine that I've already brought up once. In Supernatural Season 5 Episode 16, Sam and Dean desperately try to prevent the apocalypse and a final showdown between Michael and Lucifer, so they travel to heaven to find an angel named Joshua who can talk to God, whom the brothers reckon can fix everything. When the brothers find Joshua, the angel surprises them by telling them that God is already aware of the situation. He knows already everything you want to tell him. He knows that the apocalypse has begun. He just doesn't think it's his problem. Not his problem, but he can stop it. He can stop all of it. I suppose he could, but he won't. Why not? Why does he allow evil in the first place? You could drive yourself nuts asking questions like that. God fixing everything is not a viable answer in fiction. God fixing everything means there's no need for the book, no need for the story. If that doesn't satisfy you as an answer, then consider this. It doesn't take too much imagination to realize that Gan is not exactly all-powerful. He's an entity like many others with limits to his powers. This is true of deities all over fiction. A more interesting question or fan theory to ponder is, what did Roland do in his very first cycle or in his life before he went to hell for Gan to condemn him to an eternity of temporal causality loops? But I'm not sure there's enough evidence to speculate on that, so we'll leave that maybe for another time. Okay, fine and well, but there's still one final question. What does this all mean? There is a lesson here. What is it? Well, Roland saves the multiverse, but not for any noble reason, for his own selfish desires. So the Dark Tower punishes Roland and sends him to hell. The moral of the story condensed into one sentence: if you don't carry yourself honorably and forthrightly, if you don't stand and be true, you don't deserve to be saved, even if you saved the world. This is the morality of the Dark Tower. Whether this is just or not is a different question, one we're meant to ponder collectively in the hopes for an answer. According to Jonathan Haidt in his book The Happiness Hypothesis, if a person murders another, it would take that person to save 25 children for society to accept him or her as a good person. Did Roland deserve to go to hell? He saved everyone. Is the Dark Tower right to punish him? I'm not the person that claims they have the ultimate understanding of morality or ethics. Therefore, I leave such conclusions to you. Thanks for watching. If you agreed with my video, I told you I was the world's leading authority on the Dark Tower. And if you didn't, well, then I was only joking. I was just kidding. Either way, please like and leave a comment. If you agree, I want to hear about it. And if you disagree, then I really want to hear about it. Guys, this is the first video I've posted in over 10 years. I have plans for other videos, but I need equipment and stuff, so please, if you could spare a few bucks, all donations are most appreciated. Even if it's just a couple bucks really helps. I'll post my PayPal in the video description, and remember, if you don't, you'll go to hell. No, just kidding. If you can't donate, no worries, just please like and subscribe. I'll see you in Discordia!